My husband cheated with my best friend. My husband had a car accident and is currently being treated in the hospital. I just thought it was a scam, smilingly saying, "Officer, are you sure there's a mistake?" My husband told me just half an hour ago that he was on a business trip in the neighboring city. Howard, male, 32 years old. By the way, there was a woman in the car who said her name was Lynn. At this moment, my smile froze, and I was completely panicked. When I arrived at the hospital, Howard had already finished surgery. The doctor said he was not in serious condition. He had a slight fracture in one arm, which was now bandaged. As long as he is observed and nothing goes wrong, he can be discharged. When I saw Howard, he was still fairly clear-headed, leaning against the hospital bed. The moment our eyes met, I could clearly feel that he was quite flustered. "Old wifey. Why are you here? First, explain this." I shook the phone in my hand. Just as I had walked in, I had received a message from Howard on Facebook. He said there was a small problem at work and he might need to stay a few more days in the neighboring city before coming back. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would never have believed that Howard would deceive me again and again. "Jane, I didn't mean to hide it from you. Originally, I planned to give you a surprise, but who knew there would be an accident on the way? I was afraid you'd worry." Howard's tone even carried a hint of grievance as he spoke. What a master of acting. If I didn't know the truth, I might really have thought I was misunderstanding him. "Is that so?" "Yes, Jane," Howard answered firmly. "By the way, how did you know I was injured?" I answered truthfully, "The officer told me." "Is that so?" Howard's face darkened a bit. "Did the officer say anything else?" Seeing his guilty look, I couldn't help but sneer. "Could it be that you are hiding something else from me?" "Of course not," Howard quickly denied. He glanced at the door and said anxiously, "Honey, I don't think there's anything wrong. Let's hurry home." Saying that, he tried to come over and pull me. I knew what he was afraid of, nothing more than me meeting someone I shouldn't. But it seemed that fate was not on his side. Before his hand could touch me, Lynn walked in, holding Howard's test results in her hand. Seeing me, she seemed even more surprised than Howard. "What are you doing here?" "That should be my question to you. One is my husband, the other is my friend. How come you two are together?" Faced with my questioning, Lynn's expression turned somewhat embarrassed. Howard still tried to argue, "Jane, listen to my explanation, it's not what you think." But Lynn had already admitted, "That's right, just as you saw, I've been involved with your husband. He told you he was on a business trip these days, but he was actually with me the whole time." Hearing this news, my heart felt like it was being cut with a knife, and I couldn't help but shout angrily at Howard. "How can you face me after what you've done?" I had suspected this unfaithful couple, but I never imagined they could be so shameless. Howard blushed, lowered his head, and said nothing. But Lynn couldn't hold back. She gave a nasty smile, walked over to me, and sized me up and down. "Jane, I'm not trying to be mean, but look at you. Where do you look like a woman? Your figure is bloated, your complexion is pale and waxy, and I bet even the cleaning lady wouldn't wear that coat you're in. With you like this, do you really think you deserve Howard?" She seemed very pleased with herself. After humiliating me, she even threw a flirtatious glance at Howard. Such shameless behavior was unbearable, no matter how good-tempered I was. I swung my arm in a wide arc and slapped her across the face. Seeing the delicate blush rise on her face, I couldn't help but smile. "Of course nature doesn't suit you. After all, scumbags and cheap women last forever." Lynn was driven crazy by my provocation, swinging her fists to fight back, but I pushed her to the ground. "What right do you have to hit me?" I blurted out. "If I want to hit you, I'll hit you. Do I need to pick a date for it?" In the end, the doctor came and stopped this farce. Howard originally wanted to go home with me, but Lynn whined, "Howard, your injury still needs to be monitored. The doctor said there's a risk of complications." Howard valued his life more and immediately gave in. I was completely disappointed and turned to leave the hospital. Just now, I was holding on purely with a surge of anger. Once outside, the cold wind hit me and I immediately felt miserable. My husband actually got involved with my friend. What kind of human suffering is this? How could it happen to me? The more I thought about it, the more painful it became, and tears kept flowing uncontrollably. By the time I got home, it was already 3 a.m, and my eyes were swollen like walnuts. Lying in bed, my thoughts began to drift. Howard and I were college classmates, and after graduation, I stayed in this city for him. Here, I have no family, no friends. Apart from him, I had nothing. I never regretted marrying him, moving far away, or breaking ties with my parents. But how did he repay me? He cheated on me. And the person he cheated with was my friend. Lynn was a colleague I met at my first job. We were both newcomers then, in the same project team, eating together every day, fighting side by side, building a revolutionary friendship. Even though I left my job later because of having a child, we remained friends. We often arranged to eat together, go shopping together. Even after long periods without seeing each other, there was still so much to talk about. Only now do I understand that what we share is not just common topics, we also share the same man. Just thinking about what they might have done together these past few days makes me feel sick. I won't just let this matter go. The next day, I picked Bobby up from Auntie's house. Seeing Bobby looking so wronged, I felt a wave of guilt. Even though I knew Bobby had been sick these past few days, I still left him behind and went out on my own. Thinking about this, my hatred for Howard becomes uncontrollable. Bobby held me tightly and said, "Mom, I missed you." I stroked his head and replied, "Mom missed you too." Bobby is a sensitive and sensible child who has never left my side since he was born. Given what happened yesterday, he must have been really scared. After feeding him a little, Bobby got sleepy and slowly fell asleep. Howard came back at 3 p.m. He was carrying his suitcase and stood at the door, shrinking back timidly. He looked pitiful. According to him, he and Lynn got involved a year ago. At that time, all my attention and energy were focused on my son, and he felt neglected. Trying to get my attention, he contacted Lynn. He originally wanted to cut ties, but Lynn threatened him that if he stopped contacting her, she would immediately tell me the truth. So, Howard had no choice but to keep up a fake pretense with her. That excuse is just ridiculous. I couldn't help but laugh. It was clearly him who couldn't resist temptation and cheated, yet he still tries to blame me. Bobby is 3 years old this year, and the number of times he has been looked after doesn't exceed the fingers on one hand. Every time he comes home, he says he's tired and would rather play on his phone than take care of the child. At first, Bobby was very close to him. But after being rejected by him more and more, over time, he stopped seeking him out. Then he started complaining that the child wasn't close to him. He said all sorts of good and bad things. I always feel that Bobby lacks a sense of security because he hasn't felt paternal love. And last night, in that situation, I didn't take Bobby to the hospital, and he didn't even ask where Bobby was. Also, when Bobby was a little over 1 year old, I thought about going back to work and considered having my mother-in-law help take care of the child. But she flatly refused, saying she wasn't in good health and couldn't take care of the child. Yeah, I can't take care of the child, but I can play mahjong all night long. The child I gave birth to, if others help me take care of them, it's a kindness, if they don't, it's their right. I understand this principle. I have no right to demand that others must help me. I can only do my best to be a good mother. Maybe there was some neglect towards Howard during this process, but that shouldn't be a reason for him to betray our relationship. Moreover, if it weren't for his lack of paternal love for the child and his unwillingness to hire a nanny, I also won't devote myself entirely to the child. I absolutely cannot accept Howard's way of shirking responsibility. Of course, I'm not being unreasonable, because I haven't yet decided what to do. Infidelity is always either once or countless times. I don't believe he can change for the better. But because we have Bobby, I can't just walk away. I have to plan carefully to minimize the harm to the child. I absolutely cannot give the child to Howard. I have to find evidence first. People really do tend to push their luck. After observing me for a few days, Howard noticed I showed no unusual behavior and concluded I wouldn't make a fuss. Gradually, he started to get cocky. He even believed his charm was so great that I would compromise for him. Maybe he thought that since I married far away, with no family or friends to back me up, and no job, I lacked the confidence to stand up to him. Or perhaps he believed I was making sacrifices for the sake of our son. In any case, he felt he held the upper hand. From time to time, he would taunt me, saying, "Jane, look at you after giving birth, do you still look like a person? Your waist is thick, your legs are short, you just look unappealing. If I weren't working myself to death outside, you and the kid would be eating scraps by now." On the surface, I appeared calm and indifferent. But inside, I was still somewhat sad. At night, I looked at myself in the mirror, haggard, aged, wearing loose and worn-out clothes. How long had it been since I had properly taken care of myself? It was probably one time when I asked Howard for money. He hesitated and didn't want to give it, complaining about how hard he worked and how I was always wasting money. When he found out we had no money to buy groceries, he pulled 200 yuan from his wallet, slapped it in my face, and told me to be frugal. At that moment, I felt my dignity trampled underfoot. Since then, I would only ask him for money when I really had to. Even later, when Howard gave me money to manage, I didn't dare to spend it. I was afraid of that contemptuous look, afraid of those days without any face to show. Before resigning, I was also a girl who loved beauty. After getting my salary, I would buy clothes and cosmetics, living a relaxed and carefree life. After leaving my job, I depended on Howard to live. Even buying a piece of clothing that cost just a few dozen yuan required careful thought. In contrast, Howard said he needed to dress decently for work, and any piece of clothing he wore was a brand name. Not to mention his shoes, which easily cost thousands of yuan a pair. Thinking about this made me feel even more unbalanced. Why is it that I'm the one making all the sacrifices for the family? He spends so freely, while I'm so stingy. Every penny he earns is half mine, it's marital property. If it weren't for me providing a stable backing, could he be so devoted to his work? So, I opened the shopping platform and placed orders for several clothes I had long wanted to buy from my favorites list. After doing all this, I did feel a lot better. Howard has been sleeping in the living room these past few days. Just now, when I swiped my card, he received a message. He stormed angrily into the bedroom. The first sentence was a reproach. "Jane, what did you buy that cost so much?" "Clothes," I said lightly. "You always complain that I dress shabbily, so I bought some clothes to keep up appearances." Howard's tone weakened a bit, "But you didn't have to buy such expensive ones. You're a housewife and don't go out much, so why do you need to buy good ones? You could just pick something up online for cheap." Heh, I laughed until tears came out. "Howard, you can't even afford to support your wife buying clothes. How about this, you stay home and watch the kids, and I'll go out to work." When I resigned, my salary was higher than Howard's. Howard's face turned blotchy with anger, glaring at me fiercely before slamming the door and leaving. The noise was loud enough to wake our son. Bobby rubbed his sleepy eyes and threw himself into my arms, wiping the tears from my face. "Mommy, don't cry, Bobby will be good." "Mommy isn't crying, the wind just blew into my eyes." I forced a smile and picked up my son. "Mommy will take Bobby to eat something delicious." Because I secretly installed a tracker in Howard's car, I easily found out that after he left home, he went to see Lynn. Then the two of them went to a hotel. As for what they did, I suppose any adult would understand. I didn't feel much sadness. The humiliation Howard put me through during this time is something I will never forget in my life. My guess was right. 2 hours later, Lynn sent me a message on Facebook. It was a few photos, some of her cuddling with Howard, some selfies of herself, and a side profile of Howard asleep. This was Lynn's provocation to me, and also her declaration of war. I still don't understand. Lynn comes from a scholarly family, so how could she do something like this? I remember when she was at the company, she was an innocent and lively girl. How did she suddenly become the third party destroying my family? Could it really be that Howard's charm is just too great? To be fair, Howard is handsome, at least in a crowd, he's the first person you'd notice at a glance. But that's because I helped him complete 80% of the tasks at home. If he had to stay up late watching the kids for a few days, would he still be so carefree? He acts all proper and respectable outside, but when he comes home, he doesn't even wash his socks or underwear. Is a man like that really that desirable? Fine, since someone is eager to ask, what if I step aside? I sent Lynn a message saying, take care of yourself, and saved all the photos she sent me one by one. These are all evidence. On the third day, I entrusted Bobby to Auntie again. At the same time, I told her about Howard's affair. Auntie was very angry about it and told me to focus on my own matters. She would stay at home and told me to send Bobby over any time, she would take care of him for me. Because Lynn is both my colleague and friend, I know about her family situation. She is a local, and her house is in an old neighborhood. Both her parents are high school teachers and tend to be somewhat aloof. I had seen them once before, and although they didn't say much, I could feel that they looked down on me a bit, probably because they thought I was an outsider, not as valuable as they were. Since today was a weekend, there were many people in the neighborhood. Many elderly people were walking around with their children. Relying on my memory, I found Lynn's home. Seeing me, Lynn's parents were somewhat surprised. When I told them that their daughter had cheated on my husband, I saw the expression on their faces was one of utter disbelief. Lynn's father even wanted to immediately kick me out. I directly printed out the photo Lynn had sent me last time and slammed it down on the table. Only then did they see the truth clearly. They immediately called Lynn to come back. Now that things have come to this point, I see no reason to stay. It's better for them to handle family matters on their own. But when I left, I deliberately put in the eye drops I had prepared earlier, looking tearful and pitiful. A kind-hearted aunt asked me what was wrong, and I didn't hide anything. I told her about Lynn having an affair with my husband and even sending me photos to provoke me, and I let it all out. They have all been neighbors for decades, everyone knows each other. Upon hearing this, they immediately comforted me, saying that Teacher Cheen and his wife have lived a blameless life, and they never expected to have such an ungrateful daughter. This really tarnishes the reputation of their community. Watching them gather in groups of 3 or 5, pointing and whispering, I quietly kept my achievements to myself and walked away with a flick of my sleeve. When I got home, the clothes I had ordered a few days ago had just arrived. After trying them on, I found they fit quite well. As the saying goes, clothes make the man. Wearing good clothes instantly lifted my spirits. I bought some fruit and took it over to Auntie, and on the way back, I picked up Bobby. Bobby is a sweet little guy who even knows how to compliment me, saying, "Mom, you're really beautiful." I smiled happily with my eyes squinting. Yes, not only should your mom dress beautifully, but she should also live beautifully. Lynn didn't keep me waiting long. I guessed she must have been upset by her parents and wanted to get some satisfaction from me. When the call came, I put it on speakerphone. "Jane, are you crazy? Coming to my house like this, what do you think you're doing? You're really something, can't even control your own husband, and you think I'm a pushover? Let me tell you the truth, we've been together since the day after you married Howard. The night before you gave birth, he was with me too. Didn't expect that, huh? Surprised? You're just a loser, destined never to have a man's love. Don't worry, I'll never let you have it easy." Lynn's tirade left everyone present stunned in place. "Jane, was that Lynn on the phone just now?" The person speaking was the receptionist from my previous company. We got along quite well, and since it was the weekend, we organized this gathering, thinking we could have afternoon tea together and relax a bit. I pretended to be overwhelmed, fully playing the victim. That's too much, I never expected her to be that kind of person. Jane, you've been wronged. This was the HR person from my former company, the most warm-hearted of all. Wherever there was injustice, she was there. They are all really, really good people. To be honest, if it weren't for unavoidable reasons, I truly wouldn't want to leave. Not just because of the high salary, but because every colleague was especially kind and friendly. Of course, except for Lynn. They were all indignant and decided to help me seek justice. I was grateful for that, but at the same time felt a bit embarrassed since I had deliberately let them overhear. But the receptionist's words dispelled my unease. Jane, you're not at fault, she is. If we didn't know her true colors, this time it's you, next time it could be me. Lynn probably broke down under the double pressure from both home and work. Her first move was to give up completely. I heard she has now moved out of her parents' house and rented a place with Howard, living a simple life. And she tirelessly shares their happy life with me. She thought this would hurt me and throw me into chaos. Sorry, I have to disappoint her. I have already started looking for a new place to live with my son. I'm going to make a big move. My target for revenge is not just her, I won't let Howard off either. He's in procurement and takes kickbacks openly and secretly. Usually, if no one reports it, it might be overlooked, but when it's out in the open, ignoring it would be unacceptable. So, early one morning, after settling my son, I went to Howard's company and reported him by name. This was a red line for the company. The boss was furious and dismissed Howard. Although he didn't lose his job entirely, his future was ruined. Indeed, when one's own interests are at stake, no one can remain impartial. A while ago, when I dealt with Lynn, Howard was still indifferent. But now, as soon as I touched his cake, he went crazy. This time it's his turn, and he immediately lost his composure. I guess as soon as he got off work, he came back. Standing in the living room, he shouted at me, Jane, you're fucking crazy. What good does ruining me do? Huh? You really have some guts, I want to see what skills you actually have. Howard, the furious, swung his fist at me, throwing all dignity and manners aside. Our son was resting in his room, but when he heard the noise and saw Howard trying to hit me, he ran over and bit Howard's leg. That scumbag Howard actually grabbed our son and threw him aside, hitting the corner of the table. Bobby's forehead immediately turned red. Poor kid, only 3 years old, and treated like this by his own father. Howard is simply a beast. Seeing the scene, he was stunned, his lips trembling. I didn't mean to. I had no time to pay attention to him, picked up my son, and took a taxi to the hospital. Fortunately, my son was fine, otherwise, I would have wanted to kill Howard. On the way back, Bobby kept comforting me, Mom, it doesn't hurt. With such a large red mark, how could it not hurt? Bobby was afraid I would worry, so he deliberately said he was fine. Such a sensible child, and Howard doesn't even know how to cherish him. Since that's the case, I'll take my son and leave on my own. When we got home, Howard was already gone. He has become such a scoundrel that he doesn't even care about his own son, he's beyond saving. Actually, I deliberately provoked them. After all, I want to get through this day and continue to pretend to be deaf and mute. There's no need to make such a big fuss. But I am not willing to give up. Howard destroyed my most beautiful imagination of marriage. Whenever I think back to those days, I always feel so stifled that I want to die. The angrier and more anxious they get, the more mistakes they make, and the more advantage I have. Now, the ones who are anxious are them, not me. Howard has now completely broken ties with me. He is living with Lynn outside. I don't want them to have it easy, so from time to time I post a few messages on Howard's Facebook begging for his forgiveness, just to disgust Lynn. How could a woman like her, a mistress who rose to power, resist checking Howard's phone? After all, their relationship started on the phone. Later, I thought about it and maybe I was the one who facilitated their first contact. At that time, Howard, as my boyfriend, met Lynn with me once. To show goodwill, they even exchanged contact information. But none of that matters anymore. Every time I sent a conciliatory message to Howard, Lynn would go crazy sending me moments of their happiness. Whether it was text, pictures, or videos. I even felt like I might know their life better than Howard himself. As for Howard, he probably thinks I'm two-faced. When he sees me, I'm like a shrew, noisy and quarrelsome. When he doesn't, I'm as gentle as a little lamb. He's sure that everything I do is to win him back. That's how confident he is. Unlike Howard's methodical approach, Lynn definitely couldn't hold back. After all, she has neither reputation nor job now, and she's not as carefree as I am. She has to hold on to Howard tightly, or else all this suffering would be for nothing. About a month later, Lynn got pregnant. She was the one who told me first. Her exact words were, "Jane, get ready to be divorced." After hearing this news, I felt a huge sense of relief. Lynn really didn't disappoint me. I knew she would come up with a trump card. Actually, there wasn't much of a verbal fight. It was just Lynn linking arms with Howard, proudly showing off to me. The doctor said the one in my belly is a boy. It's not just you who can have children, I can also carry on Howard's family line. She still thinks she lives in a feudal society. I said nothing, just dressed myself in a particularly sloppy way. Compared to Lynn's refinement, my unkempt appearance was even more obvious. Howard glanced at me as if he saw something dirty, his nostrils flaring up like they were reaching the sky. I remained extremely calm. I wasn't interested in the house, but I demanded 80% of the family money. Howard disagreed, so I took out the photos Lynn had sent me earlier. The more Howard looked, the uglier his expression became, and in the end, he gave Lynn a fierce glare. Anyway, I can wait. But Lynn's stomach can't. The two of them discussed for a long time and finally agreed. I know, this must be thanks to Lynn. Bobby, Howard hesitated a bit. Lynn immediately spoke up. Howard, just give Bobby to Jane. Have you forgotten last time he bit you, and it even bled? Howard seemed to have made up his mind. The son is yours. But don't expect me to pay child support. I don't care either. Afraid that things might get complicated over time, I quickly drafted the divorce agreement and went to the Civil Affairs Bureau with Howard to complete the procedures. But due to the new policy, we still have to wait another month before the divorce is official. I can only pray that nothing unexpected happens during this month. Otherwise, all my efforts will be in vain. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. On the day of the divorce, Howard, to humiliate me, even brought Lynn along. As soon as we got our divorce certificate, the two of them lined up again to get their marriage certificate. This move left the staff quite stunned. After stepping outside, Lynn waved the red booklet in her hand and said, "Jane, you lost." I didn't want to bother with the two of them, I was eager to go back and pick up Bobby. Besides, we were already divorced, and they no longer had any use to me. Who would still want to play along with them? After seeing Bobby, I had already made up my mind. There was nothing left in this city worth holding on to. I planned to return to my hometown. My hometown is a small county town in a 5th or 6th tier city. I don't know if it's because I'm nearing home, but the closer I get, the more uneasy I feel. Back then, I went all in to marry Howard. Now, returning after the divorce, can my parents still forgive me? Standing at the doorstep, I hesitated. Bobby quietly asked me, "Mom, where's this?" I couldn't help but smile bitterly, this is Grandma and Grandpa's home. Just as I was hesitating at the door, my dad came back from buying groceries. Seeing the white hair on his head, I immediately couldn't help but burst into tears. My parents did not blame me. After learning everything Howard had done, they felt deeply sorry for me. My older brother was even ready to set off immediately to confront Howard. Seeing my family hold no grudges against me warmed my heart. At the same time, I felt deeply ashamed of my past recklessness. My parents loved Bobby very much, which made me feel more at ease staying at home. But I did not agree. Although my brother cared for me a lot, and my sister-in-law was very kind, I understood the saying far fragrance, near stench. I didn't want my divorced sister-in-law to cause any resentment in my brother and sister-in-law's hearts. After living at home for half a month, I looked for a house in the county. The previous landlord was moving out of town and wanted to sell the house in the county. The price was quite reasonable, and it came with renovations. After some consideration, I bought it. When I divorced, the money Howard gave me was just enough. Having my own house finally gave me some confidence. On the day of moving, I was especially happy. I made a big table full of dishes at the new home to treat my family. After my parents and brother and sister-in-law left, it was just Bobby and me at home. I held Bobby and said, "From now on, it will just be the two of us living together." Life in this small city is very peaceful. Although there is no nightlife, it brings a sense of comfort. The only problem is that there aren't many job opportunities. I searched through all the job apps but couldn't find a job. Reluctantly, I planned to start a small business myself. After all, I have to support both myself and my son. I remembered that I used to enjoy baking. I often baked little cakes and cookies for my son. I wonder if setting up a small stall here would work. I decided to just go for it. I bought the ingredients and an oven. The first batch I baked was praised by my parents and my brother and sister-in-law, which gave me a bit of confidence. At first, I set up a stall at the school gate. In the evening, I would go to the night market to sell. Because the taste was good and it was clean, it became quite popular. By the second month, I started to have repeat customers. Later, my business got better and better, to the point where demand exceeded supply. I began taking orders on Facebook. I hired a younger brother from my maternal family to deliver the goods for me. A year later, my cake shop became more and more well-known. I rented a storefront near my home and opened the shop. After another 6 months, I had earned enough money to pay off my mortgage, and with the remaining money, I bought a small van. Bobby had already started kindergarten. I was also entering a new phase of life. I never expected to run into Howard again in this small town where my family lives. You have to know, we had been divorced for 3 years. The busy life has made me not think about my past life for a long time. It's just that Howard looks a bit disheveled now, with white hair starting to show on his head. He looked at me, somewhat hesitant to recognize me. "Jane, you've really changed a lot now." "Yes, my life is comfortable now, with no financial pressure. In my free time, I take care of my skin and work out. Although I'm already 33, people around me say I look about the same as when I was in my 20s. Maybe it's the fortune that nurtures a person. I'm now somewhat of a small boss." Facing Howard's scrutiny, I grew a bit impatient. "I still have to pick up my son from school later. If you have something to say, just say it quickly." Howard seemed a bit embarrassed to speak. "Jane, I regret it. Can we go back to the way things were?" "What?" I felt like I was hearing the biggest joke. "Once you've spilled water on the ground, can you really take it back?" "Jane, I really regret it. Please forgive me, let's live well as a family." Howard said this as he tried to take my hand, but I avoided it. Just as my brother came over looking for me, he saw it. I used to worry about not being able to find him, but now he was delivered right to my door. I had to give him a beating. Howard, that coward, ran away after getting punched. Something strange happened. The next day, Lynn also came. Her current appearance was vastly different from before. She used to be youthful and beautiful, refined and petite, but now she looked like she had aged 10 years. She especially resembled my former self, as if drained by some ordeal. Could something have happened? I wondered to myself, while keeping a close eye on Bobby. I always felt they came with ill intentions. Later, I found out that they were indeed quite unlucky. After they got married, they once had an argument in the car, and unfortunately, another accident occurred. This time, they weren't so lucky. Lynn's pride, their child, was miscarried, and Howard seemed to have injured some of his functions as well. In his 30s, Howard desperately wanted a child, but Lynn just couldn't conceive. On top of that, Howard's mother had moved from the countryside to the city. The three of them cramped into a tiny apartment of just a few dozen square meters, tensions mounting and conflict ready to erupt at any moment. So Howard thought of me. He also started thinking about Bobby. What a joke, does he really think I would be foolish? Or that Bobby would recognize him as his father? To seek my forgiveness, Howard showed up at my little shop every day, hoping to win me over and then trick Bobby away. But Bobby was no longer that 3-year-old child. According to him, he was now 6 years old, a little man who could protect his mother. Every time Bobby saw Howard, he would ignore him. "Mom, Dad is not a good person." Although Bobby's words were a bit harsh, I didn't correct him. Not all mistakes can be made up for. At first, Howard was indeed very patient, playing the role of a responsible father every day, caring for Bobby. Later, perhaps he got annoyed or lost patience. He started taking shortcuts and even tried to secretly take Bobby away. When the kindergarten teacher told me this news, I almost fainted from anger. After I came to my senses, I immediately called my brother and drove to chase after them. Just thinking about Bobby being forcibly taken away by them broke my heart. Fortunately, someone noticed something was wrong and thought Howard and the others were kidnappers, so they called the police. That's how we managed to stop them and get Bobby back. After this incident, I truly hated Howard with a passion. My brother even beat him up badly. Scared, Howard ran back home that very night. As she left, Lynn looked at me with resentment and said, "All the crimes I'm facing now are because of you." I curled my lips into a cold sneer and said, "Then I really have to thank you for freeing me. Since you like stealing my things, I wish you and Howard never to be separated. Those two troublemakers should just stay together forever." Another year passed, and Bobby started elementary school. I also stepped out of the shadow of the past and began to recover. My mom said she wanted the neighbor's aunt to introduce a match for me. I refused. I feel that my life is pretty good right now, having money, leisure, and a son. I can also be by my parents' side and take care of my family. My mom advised me that when Bobby grows up and no one is around to keep you company, you will understand what loneliness is. After thinking it over carefully, I still felt it wasn't right. Although I am not disappointed in men, I do have some resistance toward romantic relationships. Moreover, besides love, there are many other important things in life. Suppose one day I meet someone who gives me the courage to walk down the aisle again, that would mean I am lucky enough. But if not, I am not afraid. Life shouldn't be monotonous. I have my own brilliance.